In today's episode, you're listening to two strangers have an open-hearted conversation. I saw Julie's profile and decided to send her a message and ask if she'd be willing to be on the podcast. Little did I know how enriching of a conversation we were going to have. We go deep into vulnerability and intimacy and really amplifying, be yourself and be honest about what you are experiencing. I hope you'll enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast, Julie. I'm very thankful you're here with me.
Natalie, thank you so much for bringing me up to Canada to talk with you through the miracle of Zoom.
Yes. I want to start off. How's your heart doing?
Wow. Do you mean my literal heart or my feelings?
Your feelings.
I asked that back at you because I had panic in January that I thought was a heart attack. And it was only after summoning the paramedics that I learned I was not having a heart attack, and talking with my doctor the day or two afterwards, learned that it was just panic, and just panic that can be terrifying. And I think it was panic over the state of America. Frankly, I was sensing in my bones what was happening. This was in the days that would turn out to be the days before the insurrection. But I knew as an African-American person that they were coming. I had felt them coming for years. And that panic, I think, caused me to have this physiological response. So that's where my mind first went when you asked about my heart. My heart is in a good place right now. I am in a 33-year-long commitment with a human who is just extraordinary. My husband, my partner, Dan, and he and I don't miss an opportunity to let each other know what we mean to each other. So we have worked hard at staying in love over time, as we call it, at the work of it. And my relationship with him is my primary relationship outside of my relationship with myself. And that relationship is consistently holding me up when the world or a situation or a circumstance or an issue threatens to knock me down.
Thank you for sharing so openly and honestly. In a world where we tend to want to put masks, or we guard how we're really feeling and put up this kind of defense mechanism of strength and everything's okay. It's like, well, strength is allowing yourself to be human and understanding the world is a little bit upside down right now. And the things that have been known are finally being revealed. Yet still there is an ignorance of denial, of not wanting to address and face the things so that we can go into healing, go into addressing the things that are uncomfortable, go into addressing the fear. When you just spoke, my nervous system gave me chills all the way through, because what I know to be true now more with my journey is our nervous systems are what are keeping the memory. So our ancestors are speaking through us through feelings and frequencies. So as you said, the heaviness of what was coming through your nervous system being in America, you knew what was, and so it's a charge of all of the reality, the truth of what's, the country was built on, and how there's still denial of it.
Yeah.
And the oppression. So I could feel our nervous systems connected. As much as there's distance, it connected, and really feeling that. And I thank you for allowing people to see where, our thoughts have such an impact on our body. And we weren't really taught how, to what degree, what we can do with our thoughts, what really stress is.
Yeah. And there's another piece. Thank you for saying all of that. I really feel seen around what I shared. I'm grateful to you for that. And I presume this is what your listeners come to this podcast for. I'm on a lot of podcasts and they rarely go in this direction. So I'm delighted for the chance to be in this space and to just sit in it with you and your listeners. There's another piece that I feel that I can share, which is part of the panic was political. And then when I began to feel stress and strain and ache and pain in my shoulder, in my chest, I have such shame around the size of my body. I'm overweight. I'm trying not to use terms that are going to trigger anybody else, but like medically speaking, the medical profession says I'm obese, and I was shamed around my weight. When I was 50 pounds lighter than I am today, I was at a college health center, 20 years old, trying to be seen for a bronchial thing. I'd been coughing for weeks, college, university life. You all live closely together and get each other's germs. And I finally went into the health center because people were telling me I should. And all the doctor said was, do you realize how much weight you've gained since you got to university? And I learned then at age 20, or the learning I took from it was, no matter what the issue is, you can have a cough. They're going to say it's about your weight. Your eye's going to be twitching. They're going to say it's about your weight. Like whatever it is, it's going to be about your weight. And I'm 53 now. I learned that message at 20. And so when my body was having a stress response to what was happening in America, the shame that I carry about, well, of course you're going to have a heart attack because you're over, all of that started to come in. And I didn't want to go to the doctor in December to say, look, I'm not feeling very good. Because I didn't want to be shamed. So I sat with this fear that my heart might be problematic because I was too ashamed to go to the doctor because of what I've been taught. And so I, thankfully, for anybody listening who's like, oh my God, what is happening? I went to the doctor and I just owned all of this with my doctor. And she was great and nodded and said, I'm glad you're here and your heart is fine. And, it's valid to be stressed and worried in this world right now, so I have chosen a woman of color as my doctor, in part because I need to be with somebody who gets, with her degree of expertise, this realm that you are tapping into, which is the extent to which we carry the memories, the advice, the wisdom, the forewarnings of our ancestors. We are not just us. Yeah.
I see you, and I thank you for showing how we can stigmatize ourselves by hearing something from a professional and carry that for, decades and not even realize it's buried deep in how we're self-attacking ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's what that shame does. It's a real self-attack and not being able to address. And then, what I heard in that too is self-identifying that, well, I oughtn't ask for help because this is my problem. I caused this.
That's right.
And not even seeing the basis of, do you see your whole life in a whole extreme? And do you understand and appreciate your body? And this weight thing, it's getting up, from my personal opinion, this weight has such a stigma towards beauty, has such a stigma towards health, and it's doing more damage than actually holding space for people to have conversations of what's going on internally.
Yeah.
Let's stop about the external. Obviously, if there's something external, we need to go internal.
Yeah.
Yet to go internal, you have to allow people to be vulnerable and make sense of things, not just label things.
Yeah.
And we want to label things so quickly. And it's like, but you don't really understand what's going on internally. And if you don't have that grasp, you don't even know what the person is doing with their mind. We're feeling bodies that think. And our thoughts are a frequency and energy. And the more we're getting information from scientific that certain thoughts produce certain chemicals and stresses the cortisol, too much cortisol in the body, it starts to begin to have inflammation. It starts to impact the organs. So when people are like, okay, eating and all that, yes, I understand eating, exercise, they all have their part Yet the main part of how you're addressing and what you're doing to the nervous system, that's a big impact too, that needs to start to have discussions. Because
Absolutely.
we're holding on to a lot of stuff in our nervous system.
Yeah.
And generationally, when
Yeah.
people are talking about this generational curse, it's like, no, the generational curse is that there's a lot of charged emotions that have not been discharged.
Right. That's exactly right. I'm a memoirist, which means I write about real life experiences. I don't fictionalize them. And I have a lot of respect for people who write fiction. I can't begin to imagine creating a completely fictional world, however based on reality it may be. I instead am trying to stare in the face of our actual lived realities and write about them. I try to tell the truth as much as I can bear it. And I do it because I know that when we bring the facade down, take the mask off, and actually tell what we're feeling, what we believe, what we want, we are not only validating that for ourselves. When we share it with others, others discover they are not alone. They don't need to be ashamed that they feel that way or fear that thing or want that or did that. We discover just how very beautifully flawed or complex we all are. That lack of aloneness quickly then can become belonging, okay, I feel safe here. I feel seen here. And actually, I've just launched this brand new thing I want to tell you about. You might have asked me at the end, like, is there any place people can find you? But it just is apropos right now. So I want to mention it. It's called Julie's Pod. And it's an online virtual community that's situated around a newsletter that I write weekly. It just launched early in September. But I invite people to be in the space with me. So to actively comment, I'm going to do live events that kind of step off of or that springboarded from whatever I've written in the newsletter. Like, for example, my next one is my next newsletter is, I learned young that I was problematic. And I've written that essay and I ask people to respond to the ways in which they resonate. But then there'll be a live event where we can talk about, all right, let's come and talk about that. Did you learn young that you are problematic? Go, tell us, and know that you're in a safe space and you're going to be supported around sharing that. And you're going to feel a sense of belonging to this community of people who have been made to feel that way. That's my work. I am interested in each one of us feeling more okay in the selves we inhabit with the identities we carry, not just more okay, but, deep acceptance.
Yeah. It's radical acceptance. Like it's radical to accept the things that you've been told that are of flaws and should be unacceptable. And you oughtn't be that, and you oughtn't this and all that. And it's like, but it's a part of me and it's part of my experience. So how could I push away something that is within me? How can I better understand it? I think also too, what I'm hearing, the space that you're creating is when we feel a sense of belonging in a community, it's that we are belonging more to ourselves.
Yeah.
We're removing that space that we have of disconnecting from that charge of really acceptance, of being able to feel, just naturally feel and let it process through and not resist it, not shame it. And I think, more and more it's understanding as soon as somebody's crying, everybody comes to the defense thinking it's about sadness. And it's like tears hold so much that it is belittling to say it's only sadness. It is an array of emotions and experiences. I always stated that it's the language of the heart that cannot be said into words.
Yeah. I love it.
It's overwhelming. When we can relate and really understand a person's work, we have a better understanding of being curious about ourselves.
Yeah.
What can you thank COVID for?
I have a better relationship with my mother as a result of COVID. It was March 2020. We were in lockdown here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We all own a home together, my husband, mother, and I, to afford the better public schools for our children, better neighborhood. We combined financial efforts, and bought one house together. And that has been obviously full of upsides and benefits, and it has had its challenges as well. Actually, my next book is a mother-daughter memoir co-written with my mother, who's now 82. it was so early in the pandemic and we were in lockdown, as I said. So particularly people her age, she was 81 at the time, were told, don't leave the house. It is not safe. We didn't know yet then, how is it transmitted? We were wiping down the surfaces of our groceries and doorknobs and all of that. And my mother stormed off to the grocery store and looked at me and very accusingly said, I need to see people. I've only seen you 3 times in the last 2 weeks. And I felt stung by that. I felt smacked in the face. I felt angry and I felt defensive. And I think the anger was the sort of protection for this defensiveness I was feeling, of the insecurity. I felt accused. Like, I was like, what do you mean you've only seen me 3 times? I've seen you every day, Mom. And I know it because I'm so effing busy and stressed out of my mind, but I'm making a point to come visit you every day, to pop in every day. She's like, I've only seen you 3 times. And I was like, that's not true. And she was like, whatever, I'm going to the store because I need to see people, i.e. I'm not seeing enough of my daughter in a pandemic. So I have to go put myself in danger and go to the store to see people. That was the message implicit I took. My 18-year-old daughter, 19-year-old, I guess at the time, saw all of this, saw her grandmother march off to the store. And she said, Mom, I know that you visit Gaga every day. You're looking out for me and my brother, we're both home. Your work is a disaster because no one wants the speaking gigs anymore. Like your work, and you're cooking dinner for us and I see you doing all this and I see you going and making sure you check in with Gaga. And I was like, yes. And I felt so soothed by her. Like she was doing great active listening. And she said with a kind look on her face, but Mom, I think Gaga might also be right. And I said, how is that possible? I've seen her every day versus I've only seen you 3 times in 2 weeks is not reconcilable. And my daughter said, well, here's the thing, Mom, for Gaga, it's not a proper visit unless you come inside, you sit down in a comfortable chair, she offers you a beverage, and you stay for 45 minutes to an hour. And that insight was spot on and blew my mind. The moment my mother got home from the store, I went and relayed all of this to her with some apologies, and she apologized too for the mood she'd been in. And we've had a daily coffee hour ever since. And I sleep in on weekends, but a weekday coffee hour. So I spend 5 hours a week with my mother now, where I had been, frankly, I was distancing myself in many ways for various reasons. And the pandemic brought me to a deeper knowing of my mother and a deeper knowing of me by her than we've ever had, because we've been making the time. And we've had difficult conversations over coffee. But we are deepening our trust for each other and have created a pretty safe space in which to have tough conversations. And so that is something I'm grateful for. And we'll definitely carry forward for the rest of life, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or anything. I will make time to give my mother what she was looking for, and which I have discovered is something that I value too.
Have you seen a change in the relationship with your daughter?
Yep, I have. She's been away at school for much of this. She goes to school 3,000 miles, however many kilometers that is. You do the math. For me, she's on the East Coast of the United States, North Carolina. I'm here in California. But as you ask it, I realize that yes, our relationship has seemed to emerge from a little bit of the potentially prickly teenage years or teenage dynamic. I'm not saying it's her. It's just as she has been a teenager, we have had, pretty good dynamic, but at times quite prickly. And I think she's seeing me doing the work on myself. When I slip up, I'm transparent and I'll say, you know what, I just noticed I did this and I'm sorry, I'm working on it. And both of my kids really respond well when I acknowledge my own work. And I think in her offering me advice and me valuing it, I think that was a leg up, a step up. Also, she's fluent in Spanish. We're native English speakers. She's fluent in Spanish. I've had learning Spanish on my bucket list for 30 years. And given the way that I look, I'm this light-skinned, Black biracial person, but a lot of people in the Latino community, which is a healthy size community here in California, assume that I'm one of them, which I love. You too? And they speak to me in Spanish, and I'm so embarrassed to have to say, lo siento, no hablo,
No hablo, no español.
no hablo. And I've decided to learn Spanish in the pandemic by using Duolingo, which is a great online app. It's a wonderful program. Every time somebody who's speaking Spanish is around me, I try my Spanish with them because that's the whole point. And my daughter and I have had, when she was home, I said to her, could we practice Spanish? Could we talk in Spanish for 15 minutes? And she was like, absolutely. And we found ourselves talking about things we never would have spoken about in English. Like she said to me, with Christmas, maybe it was some family dinner, right? When we all were vaccinated, I planned a big family dinner for family that hadn't seen each other since Christmas 2019 because of the pandemic. So this was May 2021. And she said, Mom, in Spanish, she said to me, I know that you like to go around, have everybody go around and share something at a family dinner. And she said, I really think we've outgrown that. And I was like, wow, okay, thanks for that feedback. And I didn't have this complex language in Spanish, but we got there, is my point. We never would have spoken about that in English, I think, but there was something about me muddling through the Spanish and trying to find the verb that was near the verb that I wanted to use that opened us up. Opened us more to each other. And so I've been seeking her out for advice. Really grateful for and accepting of her wisdom and advice. I think she sees that. I think she's also emerging very well into her adulting space. She's quite independent and proud of that. And we're proud of her for that. And so, yeah, this kid is launching. And I feel like she knows that I'll always be here for whatever. But I'm also deeply confident that she's got it. And so, yeah, our relationship has improved. I hadn't seen the connection to my relationship with my mom until you asked about it. And I'm glad you did.
Yeah, when we open up my nervous system is just running.
And let's pause. Let me pause for 1 second because people listening are having their own responses, right? If you've said something or I've said something that's relevant and resonant with them, their systems are going to. And I just want to pause and say, like, if that's happening for you, listener, that's wonderful. It's really great. Lean into that. Be curious. What is going on for me? What is this bringing up for me? Why is that? Love yourself through that. That's an important part of being here on this podcast, I think. Back to you.
When we repair that connectivity, it really changes the dynamic. I think what I'm hearing from what you've said is that you've allowed yourself to open up into a vulnerability of being able to listen and to hear the feedback of what you're experiencing. Whereas when we're younger, we tend to, I know it all and whatnot, and not really be able to feel that vulnerability of what's the feedback that's going on.
Yeah.
So thank you for being so intimate and being open. Your latest book, Now Your Turn, correct?
Your turn. How to be an adult.
Why that book? What inspired it?
Actually, in a very technical sense, I was asked to write it. My very first book, How to Raise an Adult. I'll try to pronounce it Canadian style here. I say adult, but y'all say adult. I know. How to Raise an Adult came out 6 years ago. It did very well. My publisher asked for a sequel. If that book was for adults, for parents on how to be better at parenting and not undermine our kids' agency and resilience, this book was to be a sequel for young adults who may be struggling as they emerge from that kind of childhood or from childhood generally, feeling less equipped to adult. And so I signed a contract to write this book, but then really struggled with how do I find my way into a book that purports to offer advice to humans about a stage of life we all go through if we survive childhood. It felt like a daunting task. I felt inadequate as any kind of authority. I think my sense of authority derived from education, not life experience, but education. And I was like, I don't have a PhD in adulting, so how am I going to write this book? Or who am I to write this book? Who am I to say that my wisdom learned from my 53 years is worth putting in a book? And I finally found my way in through this vulnerability that you and I are talking about, which is sort of, okay, I don't have to be wiser. The book opens with, I'm not wiser than you. I am older, but I'm not wiser. I have been broken, sad, scared, bewildered, ashamed. I'm rooting for all of us to make it. This book comes from that place. So once I got clear that I could just offer advice without purporting to be the be all end all knowledge keeper on these things, then I got safe. I felt like I could. And I summoned a voice that was the voice I used when I was a dean at a university, Stanford University, where I would talk with students, listen with students, really, and try to very compassionately hold space for them to better hear their own dreams and fears by asking them good questions. I try to be that voice on the page, which is harder to do on the page than in person by a long shot. And it's ultimately my compassion for, particularly for young humans, unfolding out of the compression of childhood into this fullness of adult life that pulled me forward through whatever was difficult about writing this book. And of course, I finished it. I wrote at least half of it during the pandemic, which was hard because life was hard for me then, as it was for all of us in different ways. But that then became very meta, like how do you push through struggles? How do you keep going and all of that? So compassion for humans is, I think, what makes me write all of these books, and certainly this latest one on living your best life as an adult.
How do you support your mental health?
By being on a podcast like this, girl. I am having such a fluidity of thought right now. This conversation with you right now, I'm in flow. It feels like I'm in flow, and I'm listening to the language come so easily, unencumbered. And so it makes me curious about like, what is encumbering you, Julie, outside of a conversation like this with Natalie? And I can only, in a shorthand way, I'll say, you and I are being incredibly open and clear with one another right now. This channel is just spirit to spirit, soul to soul, heart to heart, brain to brain, person to person. Like there is nothing in the way. And I know that is where we all feel like ourselves. And so for my mental health, I have a great mindfulness practice, which is really firing up, of course, right now, because it's telling me what I'm feeling as I'm feeling it. And I really check in with myself constantly when I get edgy, when I get worried, when I'm avoiding something. I'm really able to pretty easily at this point, after 14 years of practicing mindfulness, I'm able to very lovingly ask myself, what's going on? What just happened? What is it? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, it's that. Yeah, that's valid. Yep. Absolutely. All right. And what do you want to do about it? Oh, it's in the past. Can't do anything. Can you accept that? Right. So I have this loving mindfulness practice that is a huge, huge supporter of my mental health and wellness. I also really like to do the New York Times crossword puzzle. It's a way for me to it feels like a treasure. It feels like a joy. It's a competition I have with my husband. He doesn't realize we're competing. He doesn't care. He's not competitive. But I came to terms with the fact, Natalie, that as a child in my family, which was very type A, hyper competitive, everyone jockeying to matter. In my family, you mattered when you won games. You mattered when you beat people at something, even an argument. You mattered when you had the biggest pot in poker or, had the lowest score in hearts. And so I said to my partner, husband, Dan, one day, I realized that I feel loved. When I beat you at the crossword puzzle, I feel love. And since he usually beats me, we do it in you can do it online. It'll tell you that you've gotten it correct and gives you the time it took. So we can tell to the precision of a second, like, no, you beat me. And he wins more than I do. And I said this to him. I said, I feel loved when I win. And he said with a smile, so if it's a day when I happen to finish first, but I immediately tell you, I love you, do you think that'll be enough? And I just sat with it for like 2 seconds. And I said, yes, actually, yes. And that's what we do. Last night, we did both a Wednesday and a Thursday. He beat me on both of them. And each time he's like, I love you. And I feel it. And I felt it. And boy, that was a roundabout way there's a lot of information embedded in that answer. Not sure that it quite tracked onto mental health, but for me, to the broader concept of wellness, yeah.
The work is in being vulnerable and exposing what it is that you're feeling, the insecurities, and allowing there to be a language. Well, what is it that you need to feel secure?
Yeah.
And at times we can feel like, oh, that's needy. Yet a partnership is for someone to help you with the accountability of growing and allowing you a space to be messy.
Yeah.
And allow whatever we have gone through to process through. And that's why partnerships are there, so that I can support you in the best way so that you can love on yourself.
Yeah.
I appreciate you giving that information to other listeners that are there so that they can work on their own relationships with whoever they're with, that they can open up that space of vulnerability. Because when I'm coaching, that's what I explain to people too. It's, you have to be able to open yourself up to the ones that matter the most. And that can be the most challenging.
Yeah.
Yet that's where you'll tap into the love that you need for yourself.
Yeah.
Because once you're there, there's nowhere else to go into. It's you that you're going to go into.
Yeah.
Whereas when we look for our, accolades in the public and the attention and all that, yes, it gives us a type of energy. Yet our close, intimate ones, our loved ones, our partners, our children, our family members, they reflect the most intimate parts in us. And that is where it's like, I got to face myself. And I have to reveal what I don't want to see about myself, what I don't want to say about myself, because I think it will be pushed away from other people the same way that I push myself away when I have to look at it.
That's so beautiful. It's coming up for me is today's conversation over coffee with my mom, where she began to share some very personal, private information about somebody else. And I sort of put my hand up and I said, I realize you're sharing this because you're trying to bring it to me, but it triggers for me a reminder that you have shared my private information with other people. And I was able to say it in a very measured way like this. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I wasn't snarky. I was clear. And this is not the first time we've had this conversation, but I was able to go further and say, one of the things that's been so challenging for me about living in a home together is feeling that I have privacy around the things that I want to keep private. And when I hear you sharing about somebody else, it makes me fear that there is still that possibility that will happen here, which is why I don't open up to you about a lot of things. We're able to have that conversation over coffee. And I know my mother's not a gossip. It wasn't, that's not, she said to me back after saying, I'm sorry, and this and that, she said, you are the only person I talk to like this. She calls me her best friend. And she, wants to bring this heavy information somewhere. And I understand that. And also it triggers for me the time when I have been the person whose private things were shared. And so I want to do that work of being able to just let it all be fine. And I knew that sharing with her the trigger that's there is one step toward releasing it from me.
Yeah. And it was a boundary. You held your own boundary toward yourself that, listen, as nice as like, I'm going to support her and I got to realize what's going on within me and how it's impacting my relationship with my mother because of what I'm perceiving in my insecurities. So that was boundary work.
Let me just say that is new for me, particularly in that relationship. So that is one of the things I'm working really hard at.
And for the listeners, remember, Julie said her age, 53, and this is only new now. So those that are really hard on themselves, recognize there's no, I should have known this by now. It's when you're ready to open up, to do the work with that and to lean into it. And this is the one thing I think about being a so-called adult and maturing. There is no arrival place.
Right.
And there's no, you should have known better, or you ought to have had all the answers. It's like, it depends on your experiences. It depends on what you've gone through. It depends on all kinds of different things. And the only time that you will implement knowing better is when you have that acceptance and you're willing to see, acknowledge. And that's hard to swallow. It's difficult to swallow. Because what you went through to express that to your mother, there were so many filters that you had to go that were mechanisms for yourself to feel like it was protective, not feeling that I could use my own voice to express how this is making me feel and how I'm interpreting things without feeling that I'm offending my mother. And that's real boundary work.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Absolutely 100%. I've told you we're writing this book together. We're just in the phase right now where we write a proposal to describe the book we'll be writing. And if we're fortunate, someone will say, yes, write that book, we'll publish it, and then off we'll go. But I think she and I are recognizing that to write this book, to be of service to others who find themselves in a multi-generational living situation by choice or by circumstance, that's why we're writing it, to try to be of use, to try to offer through good storytelling lessons we've learned the hard way or growth that we've undertaken individually and as a pair. We've realized that the act of writing this thing is going to bring up, we think, she actually said something beautiful. She's like, I need to stop thinking that our growing is done. And I said, absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, I want to grow until I draw my last breath. And I hope that's true for our relationship and for us as individuals. And so there isn't like, we've learned all these lessons and now we're sharing them. No, it's like, this is the shit we've been through. This is the journey we're on. This is some of the insights we've had, hoping it serves others. And it's going to excavate more stuff. If somebody was to say to me, what is this book ultimately about? Or for you, Julie, we're each going to alternate chapters. So she might have all the odd chapters and I have all the even chapters, equals through the book, which is a theme of this conflict of living together. I would probably say that my biggest, like my arc, where I travel from in this book, is around boundaries. Having none, not even knowing the language, let alone knowing how to ask for them or articulate them, which meant, how am I going to have sex with my husband in my house that I co-own with my mother when she's right through the walls and we do not have a healthy relationship around sex? Because she was traumatized, teenage mother, could never talk to me in a healthy way about these things because of what she'd been through that weren't well processed. And so here I am now, a fully grown woman, feeling ashamed that I might want to have sex because I was taught to be ashamed of all of that. Right. And that's going to be in this book. And being able to talk about that ultimately and set up that boundary of I have the right to have sex in my house, period. And wow, listen to me talking about this book that doesn't even exist yet, but that's, I
You're
think
manifesting it right now by talking about it.
My boundary growth is something I'm proud of, and it certainly brings me relief.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because a lot of times people think boundaries are putting up walls and pushing people away, where they don't realize the boundary is with yourself. Mm-hmm. We've been so concerned of what other people are going to perceive, other people's emotions, other people's thoughts, where it's like, no, it's about you now. You have to advocate for yourself. And you also have to see when you're putting yourself in positions that are no longer serving you and that you can walk away. It's not pushing somebody away. It's recognizing the respect for yourself. Yeah. And what you will, like, the word tolerate is such a dirty word. And we do it a lot in life. And that has us just taking scraps in life.
Yeah, interesting.
We tolerate a lot.
Yeah.
We tolerate hoping that things will change or whatever narrative there is. And it's like, change only happens internally. So if you're waiting for somebody else to change, that's not your job. And you're tolerating a lot, and you are putting yourself in situations that you are probably not liking yourself much. And that's having an impact. I want to ask you about DJ.
That being my nickname, actually. Some students called me that. So I already had one nickname, which was Dean Julie. And then some students further shortened my title to DJ. I felt so honored that they trusted that I had something useful to offer. My mantra as dean was for myself that if I was going to have the impact I was trying to have, I had to be three things: visible, relevant, and credible. Visible meant I had to show up in spaces that mattered to them the performances they were putting on, the activism they were demonstrating, the dorm conversations, the football games, I needed to be visible, not sort of set apart. Two, I had to be relevant. That meant they needed to know that I was conversant in the things that mattered to them. And I had to be credible when I opened my own mouth to share my thoughts. And those were the values that anchored me in that work. And when I hear somebody call me DJ, even still, or Dean Julie, I feel that is what I achieved. And it makes me feel good.
Thank you for that offering. Being a parent and guiding so many students, I'm sure that was a balancing act of having to support your personal life and the one as dean.
Dan and I have been together forever, as you know, and I fell in love with him in part because when he was 19 and I was 20, he said, if I ever have kids, I want to be home with them. And he has been. So I had the maternity leave that was allowed, which in my day was 12 weeks of leave, a lot of it unpaid, and back to work full time. I did so secure in the knowledge that my husband, my children's father, and my mother were looking after my babies. And it is, with all respect due to Dan, that I'm able to say, like, yeah, that balance was easier for me than it is for many, because my partner in raising these kids was a full partner in every sense of the word. And there are things I missed out on in my kids' upbringing because I was able to be a full-time professional working outside the home mom. But I'm confident my kids had those experiences with their dad. And that's a trade-off I made.
I want to take a moment and say thank you, Dan. Thank you for being amazing. Thank you for your mother also of being the village.
Absolutely. And while we're thank Dan's mom, I want to thank Dan's mom because my mother-in-law raised this guy, to know that it's not women's work or whatever. It's like, no, he was clear before I, got to him that that's what he wanted and valued. And I think my mother being a part of the child rearing is a part of the guilt I carry, which is part of the tension I bring when I think about, in this arrangement we've had of living together, like who is in whose debt here? Can I ever repay the debt I owe my mother, in theory, for being somebody who looked after my children a number of days a week? And actually, I'm feeling whatever debt there is, I'm feeling the repayment happening now as she's entering her 80s and is a little bit, she's very hale and hearty, but she has, her moments and her needs. And I'm feeling this sort of tenderness of, care that despite everything else in our history over 53 years, like I'm just able to be 100% there spiritually, emotionally, physically, for whatever she needs. And when those things happen, there's a little voice in me that says, you're worried about repaying any debts? You are, you are.
What people don't realize, there's grief in a lot of things in our life. We could have the most successful career, yet there is a loss. Yeah. There's a choice that you made, and there is a grief that, there was something else I had to not invest in.
Yeah.
We're not honest really about that grief that we carry through life. Yeah. Because no matter what, there's always, two parts of a choice.
Yeah. And we're told, at least I'm a generation older than you, I think. I'm
47.
Oh, you are? You look fantastic. As we say here, Black don't crack. And I presume you have a similar concept linguistically in Canada. I don't presume to know your ethnicity or race, but just looking at you, we have hair and skin tone that's sort of similar. Anyway, I was going to say there was this advertisement in the 70s for a perfume that went, I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never, never, never let you forget you're a man, 'cause I'm your woman, right? We grew up with that shit. I can bring home the bacon, earn money, fry it up in a pan, be the housekeeper, homemaker, and never let you forget you're a man, be like a sex pot all at once. That was the imperative of the 70s that I feel is sort of the backdrop soundtrack that I hear still. Not so loud anymore, but it's there. There was this sense then, as women were newly en masse emerging into the workforce and still keeping track of business at home, that somehow we were supposed to do it all. It's absolutely absurd.
The indoctrination of things, we have to be aware, and we have to have honest conversations, and to allow spaces. I do create spaces where, the mom guilt, the parent guilt is a real thing. And it's okay, well, let's talk about it so that you can see where it's a self-attacking of yourself. You have to be able to see your life in context, not in this expectation of, I got to be everywhere at all times. And it's like, you're not able to be, even though they try to sell this kind of illusion. It's like, no, this is marketing. It's unrealistic. I'm going to have you reflect back to you being 18, and I'm going to have you sit in that feeling, seeing the totality of who you were at 18, and you're able to offer yourself 3 words, taking this awareness now and talking to your 18-year-old self. What would those 3 words be?
You are worthy. So 18 for me was lived right up the street from where I am now at university at Stanford. I arrived as a 17-year-old. I turned 18 in November of my freshman year. My first year, I was getting some feedback that I was not thriving academically. I was ashamed that I wasn't thriving. I thought it was because I was Black and didn't belong there, and all those stereotype thoughts were in my head. I'm shorthanding them now because they're complex and lengthy, and I've written a book about it, but I'm just dancing along the top of these memories. Often people say, what would you go back and tell your younger self? But you really situated me at 18. Usually I say, yes, choose Dan, right? Because Dan turned out to be the right one, but I didn't know him at 18, so I couldn't summon that one. So I went to an academic thing, and I was just so ashamed that I wasn't perfect, that I was struggling. Did not feel I could ask for help, did not feel I could own up to what was happening, which just deepened and intensified the struggle. I got a D in communication, and now I'm a New York Times bestseller with a very popular TED Talk, which is evidence that I'm an effective communicator. And that kid who got a D at 18 and was so ashamed to have received that, earned that mark, to just let her know that somehow you are going to come right back around to what it is you are here for.
Yeah, you're blooming, you're developing. Where can the listeners find you?
Oh, I would love for listeners, anyone who's stuck with us this long, come find me, because if you've liked this conversation, I think you'll like what I'm about beyond this podcast, my books, my work more broadly. So I am J. Lythcott-Haims, wherever social media is happening, including TikTok and Clubhouse. And my website is julielythcotthaims.com. And that's without the hyphen. And Julie's Pod is the new writing that I'm doing on a platform called Bulletin. So if you do jlythcotthaims.bulletin.com, you'll see my weekly newsletter, and you can subscribe to it. It's free. It's a way to ensure it just comes to your inbox instead of you having to come find it. And I love to engage with folks. I am very, very highly engaged with my social media community. If you say something, I'm likely to respond. If you have a hurt or a need, I'm likely to try to show up for you, just at a minimum to say, like, I'm seeing you say this. I want you to know. So please come find me on social and check out my website, check out my books. I'd love to engage with you.
Do you have anything you want to offer the listeners?
I'm rooting for all of us to make it, which I think I've already said, but that means you too, listener. Whatever's come up for you, as I alluded to along the way, whatever has come up for you in this conversation as you've listened while you've been driving or running or working or cleaning or wherever you've been listening to this podcast, if stuff has come up for you, be curious. That's yourself talking to you. Be curious. What's going on? What is it you want to know more about within you, about your own life? I like to quote the late poet, Mary Oliver, who in her poem, I think it's called A Summer Day, asks, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And I ask that of you, listener. This is your one wild and precious life. It is yours. I want to emphasize that. Nobody else's. You're not here to be told what to do by anybody else. You're here to ask, who am I? What am I good at? What do I love? What brings me joy? Where do I feel belonging? And then you've got to be super brave and go in the direction of those answers. So that's, I think, what I want to leave your listeners with. And I'm rooting for you to get there.
Thank you so much, Julie. This has been a very enriching, open, spirited, intimate conversation that I truly feel filled with. And I appreciate the openness, the vulnerability, and again, the intimacy that you shared. And you allowed us to have a sneak peek into your life and what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. So thank you for being such a gift in the world, Julie.
What a kind thing to say, Natalie. And you reached out to me on Instagram, I think, so, or somewhere. Thank you for reaching out and deciding, this would be a good conversation to offer your community. It's really been an honor. And like I said, I have felt very much in flow or just at ease during it. So it's really been a joy for me, and I'm grateful for it.
Remember, Julie, be kind and soft with yourself.
Okay, I'll take that with me.
Thank you for making it all the way to the end. I appreciate you and your time. If you found anything that was relevant, or perhaps there's somebody that you think can benefit from this podcast, please share it out. Help grow the community. Help grow Lift Oneself. You can find more information on our website at www.liftoneself.com. Until next time, be sure to be kind and soft with yourself. You matter.